At the exact moment diplomacy is being marketed as 48 hours away, ships are turning around. Not rerouting for weather, not pausing for maintenance. Turning back because someone, somewhere, has made the water ahead feel like a trap. Donald Trump says Iran talks could resume over the next 2 days. That's a diplomatic countdown, a message designed to calm markets, steady allies, and signal control. But at the same time, U.S. officials are saying ships were turned back by a blockade. And you need to understand what that means, because a blockade is not just a military move. A blockade is leverage. A blockade is coercion. A blockade is the moment a conflict stops being over there and starts reaching into fuel prices, shipping lanes, insurance rates, and the political survival of everyone involved. So tonight, I'm going to break down what a 48-hour claim really signals, what ships turned back tells us about the risk environment, and why these two stories, when you put them together, are not reassuring. They are a warning. The headline looks simple. The reality is not. On the surface, this sounds like two separate developments. Trump says talks with Iran could resume within 2 days. The U.S. says ships turned back because of a blockade. But these aren't separate stories. They're connected. Because in modern geopolitics, negotiations don't happen in a vacuum. They happen under pressure. They happen while someone is tightening a vice, militarily, economically, or politically, and demanding that the other side blink first. And a blockade, even an informal one, is exactly that kind of vice. When people hear blockade, they imagine a line of warships physically stopping vessels. That's the old mental model, World War era. Today, a blockade can be real without being declared. All you need is a threat credible enough to change behavior, a choke point narrow enough to matter, and a risk premium high enough that shipping companies decide the cargo isn't worth the loss. That's how you get ships turning back. Not because they were defeated, but because the math changed. And once the math changes, it's very hard to change it back, especially in 48 hours. So let's talk about what that 48-hour phrase is really doing. Why 48 hours is a strategic phrase, not a timeline. When a political figure says talks could resume in the next 2 days, it sounds like a schedule. But in crisis diplomacy, it's usually a signal, a pressure move, sometimes a test. It communicates at least 4 things at once. First, we are not out of options. It's meant to keep the public from assuming war is inevitable. Second, we expect movement soon. That's a message to Iran, but it's also a message to allies and voters. Stay calm. Third, if talks don't resume, the fault is theirs. The clock becomes a blame mechanism. If 48 hours pass with no talks, someone gets painted as the spoiler. Fourth, we're buying time. Because 2 days is often the time it takes to reposition forces, adjust alert status, coordinate with partners, or stabilize domestic politics. So the question is not, will talks resume in 48 hours? The real question is, why choose that number right now while ships are turning back? Because that combination suggests this. Diplomacy is being used to manage panic, while the operational environment is becoming more dangerous. And that brings us to the second half of the headline. Ships turned back by blockade. Ships turned back is a giant warning light. The public hears ships turned back and thinks it's just a shipping story. It's not. Maritime movement is one of the clearest, hardest to fake indicators of real-world escalation. Because shipping companies, insurers, and naval commanders are not running on vibes. They're running on risk models. A ship turns back when at least one of these conditions becomes true. The threat level crosses an internal threshold. Insurance becomes unavailable or unaffordable. Security guarantees are no longer credible. The expected loss outweighs the value of cargo or mission. And here's the part most people miss. A blockade doesn't need to be airtight. It doesn't need to stop every ship. It only needs to stop enough ships to create economic pain, political pressure, and a sense of vulnerability. If the U.S. is saying ships were turned back, then one of 2 things is likely happening. Option A. There's a direct interdiction risk. Ships believe they may be physically stopped or attacked. Option B. There's an indirect risk. Mines, drones, missiles, fast boats, or harassment patterns are making the route non-viable. Either way, the effect is the same. Commerce hesitates, and hesitation is costly. That's why markets react to maritime risk so violently. It's not just about oil. It's about the idea that global logistics can be disrupted by a small number of actors with the right geography. So now we need to define what kind of blockade we might be dealing with. What a blockade looks like in the modern Middle East. In the Middle East, a blockade can take several forms, some overt, some deniable. 1. Threat blockade, deterrence by danger. No official declaration. But a pattern of threats, warnings, and past incidents makes shipping companies self-deter. Ships reroute because captains and insurers assume the worst. 2. Harassment blockade. Ships aren't always sunk. They're boarded, shadowed, jammed, forced to stop, or targeted with drones that miss. The goal is intimidation. 3. Missile drone exclusion zone. A state or proxy signals it can hit shipping at range. Even if only a small percentage are hit, the route becomes hot and traffic collapses. 4. Mine risk blockade. You don't even need confirmed mines. You need credible suspicion because the countermeasure process is slow, expensive, and confidence destroying. 5. Bureaucratic blockade. Port access is restricted. Clearance is delayed. Tankers denied entry. It's not dramatic, but it strangles throughput. Now connect that to the talks in 48 hours line. If a blockade pressure is rising, then talks soon may be the off-ramp being advertised. The question is whether it's real or whether it's cover for a new phase. Because here's the brutal logic of coercion. If the blockade is working, if ships are turning back, then the side applying that pressure has no incentive to stop until it extracts a concession. Which means either talks are about to restart because pressure succeeded, or escalation is about to intensify because pressure is being resisted. That is what makes the next 2 days dangerous. The leverage game. Why blockades force decisions fast? Blockades compress time. They force governments to choose between bad options. Because every day a shipping lane is disrupted, multiple costs stack up. Higher freight rates, higher insurance premiums, delayed deliveries, energy price spikes, political panic, military overreaction risk. And those costs aren't evenly distributed. Some countries can absorb them, others can't. That's why maritime pressure is one of the fastest ways to internationalize a conflict. Even states that don't care about the politics care about the prices. So when a U.S. official says ships turned back by blockade, it suggests we are beyond rhetorical threats. We are in the stage where commercial actors believe the danger is real and the system is beginning to adjust behavior. And behavior shifts are harder to reverse than headlines. Now, layer in the political aspect. A talks soon narrative can be used as reassurance to the public, a signal to markets, a way to prevent allies from breaking ranks, and a way to reduce the likelihood of immediate retaliation while back channels open. But if the blockade continues during those 48 hours, the message to Iran is different. We can talk, but we can also tighten. So what do actual resumed talks look like in a moment like this? What talks resuming usually means, and what it doesn't. When leaders say talks could resume, audiences picture formal negotiations, delegations, flags, microphones. In reality, the first 48 hours are often not about formal talks at all. They're about back-channel messages through intermediaries, terms for talks, rather than talks deconfliction mechanisms to prevent accidental escalation, and probing for weakness. What will you accept quietly? And here's a key point. Resume talks do not mean resolve conflict. Sometimes talks resume because one side is trying to freeze the battlefield, while it regroups one side, wants sanctions relief without changing behavior. One side wants a hostage swap or temporary corridor, or both sides want to avoid a catastrophic miscalculation. So the real indicator isn't whether talks happen. It's whether the blockade pressure changes. If ships stop turning back, if maritime advisories soften, if insurers relax, then something real may be happening. If ships keep turning around while officials talk about diplomacy, then diplomacy is not the main event. It's the soundtrack. Now let's get into the 3 most likely paths from here. 3 scenarios for the next 48 hours. Scenario 1. Diplomacy buys a pause, temporary stabilization. In this scenario, the 48 hours line corresponds to real back-channel movement. A limited de-escalation signal is exchanged. Maritime pressure eases slightly. Both sides claim victory rhetorically. The blockade becomes less active, but not removed. What it looks like: shipping resumes cautiously, reroutes shrink. Official statements emphasize progress, but remain vague. Everyone avoids specifics because specifics would collapse the deal. Risk. A pause can be used to reposition forces. A calm surface can hide a buildup. Scenario 2. Talks stall, blockade holds, slow burn economic warfare. In this scenario, talks could resume as mostly messaging. Ships continue turning back, maritime risk becomes normalized. The conflict shifts from explosive to grinding. What it looks like: more warnings, more advisories, more isolated incidents. No decisive escalation, but constant pressure. Risk. Slow burn creates miscalculation. A single incident, one boarding, one drone hit, one misidentified radar track, can trigger a fast spiral. Scenario 3. The blockade is the prelude, rapid escalation. In this scenario, the blockade is used to shape the battlefield. Reduce adversary mobility, force predictable routes, create openings for strikes or interceptions, raise the cost of response. What it looks like: sudden tightening, broader exclusion zones, more aggressive interceptions, sharper rhetoric, emergency deployments. Risk. This is how localized crises become regional conflicts, because everyone starts operating on worst-case assumptions. Now, here's what you need to watch to determine which scenario we are in. The indicators that matter: ignore the noise. If you want to know whether talks in 48 hours is real, watch behavior, not quotes. Indicator 1, maritime advisories and routing behavior. Are ships still turning back? Are they clustering in safe areas? Are insurers raising premiums? Indicator 2, military posture. Do we see signs of defensive tightening? More patrols? More escort arrangements? More air defense messaging? Indicator 3, intermediary statements. When talks are real, intermediaries start sounding careful. They avoid bravado. They talk about frameworks, technical discussions, and confidence-building measures. Indicator 4, domestic political messaging. If leaders prepare the public for compromise, language shifts from absolute demands to conditional phrases. If leaders prepare the public for escalation, language hardens. No choice, red line, consequences. Indicator 5, the economic tells oil volatility, freight rates, and insurance premiums don't care about press conferences. They reflect perceived risk. Now, I want to connect the blockade story to something bigger, because this is where the war and money layer becomes unavoidable. The war and money reality. Blockades move markets faster than missiles. Missiles create headlines. Blockades create invoices. A blockade threat does 3 things immediately. It increases transportation cost. It delays delivery. It triggers panic buying and political pressure. And the most dangerous part is feedback loops. Higher risk, fewer ships, higher prices, more political pressure, more threats, higher risk, fewer ships. That loop can take a small disruption and amplify it into a global shock. So when officials say the ships turned back, that's not just a tactical note. It's a systemic signal. It tells you the risk environment is strong enough to change behavior. And once behavior changes, the economic effects can arrive before the first major battle. That's why the 48-hour claim matters. Because governments know that if they can't show a path to de-escalation quickly, markets will do it for them by punishing everyone. Now let me talk about the psychological warfare component, because this headline is also a contest of narratives. Narrative warfare, reassurance versus intimidation. In a crisis like this, both sides run 2 campaigns. Campaign A, reassure your side, talks may resume, we're in control. Operations will continue. Campaign B, intimidate the other side, ships turn back. Blockade, you are vulnerable. These are not contradictions. They are dual-track messaging. And the public gets stuck in the middle trying to decide which track is real. So here's the rule. The intimidation track is proven by behavior. The reassurance track is proven by outcomes. Right now, we have one visible outcome: ships turn back. We do not yet have a visible outcome: resume talks, reduce maritime risk, or a de-escalation mechanism that holds. Which means, at this moment, the intimidation track is winning. That can change, but it doesn't change because someone says 48 hours. It changes when ships stop turning around. So let's end with the core question that sits underneath this entire headline. The question that decides whether this becomes bigger. Here is the question that determines what happens next. Are we watching the opening of diplomacy or the staging of escalation? Because a blockade is rarely a side story. A blockade is usually the main lever. And when a lever starts working, when ships turn back, power shifts. In the next 2 days, you're going to hear a lot of words: progress, framework, options, restraint, consequences. But ignore the words and watch the movement. Watch the shipping, watch the advisories, watch the insurance, watch the posture. Because if the ships keep turning back, then the blockade is not a warning, it's a strategy. And if the ships stop turning back, then those 48 hours meant something real. Either way, the clock is running.